My name is Boris, which is easier to remember than the last name. I also have 3 first names, which is great if I get a speeding ticket, because then I can spell them all. It's the only joy of getting a speeding ticket. And today I was going to tell you about, or I am going to tell you about how everything is always unplanned, chaos, but turns out awesome. And as I read the title today, I thought, oh, now maybe you think that I'm saying that everything that I'm doing is awesome. It is actually not. I'm a serial entrepreneur, but also a serial loser. I've built many more companies that failed than ones that succeeded. And in fact, there's a quote from Winston Churchill, and he said, "Success is going from failure to failure without lack of enthusiasm." In that sense, I'm very successful. And today what I want to tell you is something about my experience. You can relax, it's just a few stories, it's not a presentation, this is the only slide I have. I was just going to tell you a few anecdotal stories about how if you're an entrepreneur, and many of you are, how basically you can stop planning and start dreaming. And the reason I want to talk about that is because when you go to a business school or you talk to investors, there seems to be this logical route to success, and it is you come up with an amazing technology, and then you write a business plan, and then you raise funding, and then you build the site until it's finished, and then you launch it, and kaboom, you're a millionaire. Of course, reality is completely different. In reality, there are no plans. If they are outdated, so it is totally useless to make plans. And there are some of my companies that I use as illustration of how this happened. And the biggest example is TheNextWe, which is one of the biggest blogs in the world. It's in the top 10 of 300 million blogs. It's pretty huge. Lots of people work there. We publish 50 or 60 posts a day. And often people tell me, so what was the strategy that brought you to this huge blog? Well, there wasn't really any strategy. The truth is that we wanted to launch a startup, and we couldn't afford to go to a conference. And then we said, well, so how are we going to solve that? And then my business partner said, well, we could organize our own conference. And then we're the main sponsor, and we don't have to pay. And I thought, well, like, wow, that's logical. Let's organize a conference. So we organized a conference, and we thought, my business partner, Patrick, had never been to a conference before he organized his first conference. So we had no idea how to do a conference. And we just started, we thought, well, 2.5 months should be enough to organize a conference. Well, usually conferences are organized in a year. But we didn't know that, so we just thought 2.5 months should be enough. And then we thought, well, what's a great conference? And we thought, well, great speakers. So we invited some great speakers. And then we started selling tickets, because we thought, well, you sell tickets and then you make money. And then a week before the conference, I said to my business partner, it's always cool when you're at a conference and there are these sponsor logos next to the screen. We should get some of those sponsor logos. So we called a few companies, and they said, yeah, sounds interesting. When is the conference? It's like next year. We said, no, it's next week. And they're like, are you out of your mind? You can't ask me for sponsorship for something that's happening next week. And then so we thought, oh, so we got to come up with something else. So we called another company, and we said, hey, I've got a great deal for you. Our main sponsor just canceled. You can get his sponsorship for 50% off the regular fee. And they're like, wow, that's a great deal. I'll call you back in an hour. And we got a few sponsors. Then, like a year later, or a few months later, the conference was very successful because the content was great and everybody who was there loved it. And then a few months later, we talked to a professional conference organizer. And he said, you guys have no idea what you're doing. And he was basically right, of course. And we said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, the way you organize a conference is you find sponsors who want to sponsor a theme. And that's what you organize a conference around. And then, of course, these sponsors want to be on stage. So that's what you fill half the lineup with. And then you get a few extra speakers. And then you promise that you get like 1,000 people in, because that's what the sponsors want. And then you fill up the rest with students, and you give away free tickets. And of course, he said it a little differently, but that's what we took away from it. And we're like, yeah, but that sucks, because then you've got, boring speakers on stage, and, it didn't make sense to us at all. Of course, 3 years later, the whole crisis started, and this guy is, of course, bankrupt now because he couldn't find sponsors to his event anymore. And then one day we were at Le Web in Paris. We spoke to our biggest sponsor, and we sort of hesitantly we asked, you know, are you doing some sponsoring this year? And he said, no. We've decided we can't sponsor any events anymore. And we're like, oh shit. And he said, well, you know, except 2 really high quality ones, which is Le Web and TheNextWe. And we're like, hey, okay. So our strategy, which wasn't a strategy, turned out to work well. Then we wanted to sell tickets to this conference, and we looked at some ticketing services, and they all didn't work as we wanted them to. And then my other business partner, he's a developer, he said, oh, I could build a ticketing system in like a week. That's 3 years ago, he's still coding. But this ticketing system is now a separate company, and there are like hundreds of companies all over Europe using this ticketing system because it's really cool. And so that sort of, you know, we never started this company, it just grew on us. And I think that's sort of the common theme in all startups. So the clock here says 3 minutes. Do I actually have 3 minutes, or I thought it was more like 5? Okay. So the last one I want to tell you about is Twitter Counter. And this is a company I'm really proud of. And one day we were at a conference, and somebody said, I read a great story on TheNextWe this morning. I said, oh, great, do you subscribe to the RSS feed? Because you always want to get more people subscribing to the RSS feed. And he said, no, I follow you on Twitter. This was a few years ago, like 4 years ago. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And he walked away, and then I said to my business partner, I said, you know, that might be the beginning of a trend, that people will start finding news through Twitter instead of, you know, RSS or just browsing to websites. And he said, yeah, you might be right. And I said, then, you know, if that's the case, we should build like a feed burner for Twitter so that people can put a little chiclet on their website that shows the amount of followers they have on Twitter. And he said, yeah, that sounds funny. And I said, you know, you could build this in like a day, because he's a really good coder. And he said, yeah, but Boris, you know, it's funny. But we're too busy with serious stuff, so, you know, maybe in 3 months. And the only thing I heard was that he said, that's funny. Because it reminded me of my favorite quote by Isaac Asimov, a famous writer and a biochemist. And he once said, the greatest discoveries in science are never accompanied by a eureka, like, I've got it, this is the breakthrough moment. He said, they're always, you know, you find them because somebody goes, hey, that's funny. And the story this was based on, this quote, is that he had this research lab, and there were all these biologists, they were working, and he said, I'm just sitting there watching them, and every now and then I see a few huddling together and laughing. And that's when I walk over and I say, what's going on? And then they'll say, well, we were trying to do this, and then we added this, and then this happened, and that's really funny. And he said, and those are the breakthroughs. That's the moment that you know that you've got something extraordinary that is different than usual. So when my business partner said, hey, that's funny, I thought, it's funny. So that means it's gonna work. So I went home, and I'm a really lousy coder. I'm more like a Google find copy-paste coder, right? I search for something and I hack it together, and it sort of works. And I went home and I thought, I'll take the most difficult problem that such a service would, you know, consist of, and that's generating the image with a number. But with, you know, there are countless libraries, PHP generating images stuff, and I found the easiest one, like the generating images for dummies, and I changed some parameters, and within an hour I had an image with a number in it, and it said @Boris, which you should follow on Twitter. I'm @Boris. So. And then I built a little bit more, and of course, I didn't build a website. I just stole the CSS files from Twitter and took their logo and added counter, so I had twittercounter.com. And then on Monday, I showed it to my partners, and they said, oh, yeah, that's really cute. Did you hack it together yourself? Yeah, I wrote every line. And then they said, well, when do you want to launch it? And I said, well, maybe in 3 months or something. And then Wednesday evening, we had a beer, and I said, oh, screw it, let's just launch it. So we launched it. And then the next day, the CEO of Twitter called me, or he emailed me, and he said, well, you stole our CSS, so you got to change it. And I said, yeah, I know, but I'm just so busy, and sorry, I just took your CSS. And he said, well, you got to change it, or I got to call a lawyer. I said, well, I'll change it overnight if you want, because it's night in Europe, but then you got to blog about it, and tweet about it, and everybody on the team has got to tweet about it. And he said, oh, okay, we'll do it. This was a long time ago. So I changed the CSS. I didn't really change the CSS. I just changed the color, changed the logo, and that was it. But it was good enough for them, and they tweeted about it. So we got a lot of traffic. And now, just back to the original idea, when I started coding it, I was in such a rush to finish it that I never built a front page, which is what you do when you plan a website. You plan, you always got this triangle. It starts with front page. That's where you enter, and then you log in, and then you go to your statistics or something. I didn't do that. I didn't know how to make a login screen. So what happened when you went to Twitter counter, you would just see my statistics, which is really weird. You would see my statistics, you would change my name into your name, and you would see your statistics. But the result was that I got like a lot of followers on Twitter, because people would go to Twitter counter, which was becoming really popular, to see their statistics, and they're going like, who's this Boris guy? Well, I'll check his Twitter. Hey, that's a funny Twitter. I'll follow him. So I was getting more followers every day. And then one day, a guy emailed me, and he said, I see that you are the featured user on Twitter counter. I was like, that's interesting. And he said, I would like to be the featured user on Twitter counter. I said, well, what are you offering? And he said, I'll pay you $50 a week. I said, deal. And then I went over to my partners, and I said, I've got great news. We're cash flow positive. Because the hosting costs were $30 a month. And of course, I'm not counting my hours. And so I tweeted out, I said, I just sold a week for $50. And then 3 other people said, I'll take a week too for $50. So I went back to my partners, and I said, we've got a problem. We're too cheap. So let's double the prices. So we'll make it 100 a week. And then 3 other people said, I'll take it for 100. So we doubled again, and we kept doubling. And at one point, it was $1,000 a week, and we were still selling out. So then we hired a full-time developer who took like a year to replace all my shitty code. And he built a system where people can buy their own ads, and he built in some premium features. And pretty soon, it was doing $100,000 a month, which is pretty cool for a 1-week copy-paste search on Google project. And I think it's also an important lesson, because if I would have started this Twitter counter thing with thinking about the technology, I would have drawn that triangle with a front page where you log in. And then I would have tried to raise funding, but I didn't have a business model. My users gave me my business model. I just built something that I thought, hey, that's funny. So the conclusion, my conclusion for you is, do what you want to do, hack stuff together, stop planning, and start dreaming. Thank you.